The frozen tundra stretched endlessly in every direction, a cold wasteland where the wind howled like 1,000 voices. The human colony at the edge of the planet had been struggling against the harsh conditions for years. Jack Carrington, a foreman in charge of the mining operations, had learned to ignore the cold, the endless storms, and the constant feeling that the frozen landscape was slowly swallowing everything around him. That night, the storm was especially fierce. The wind screamed outside the colony's walls, and the snow came down in thick, blinding sheets. The miners had long since locked themselves away in their quarters, hoping to sleep through the worst of it. But Jack was not one for sleep. He had a job to do, and he wasn't going to let a storm stop him. He stood at the entrance of the shelter, his thick jacket pulled tight around him, his breath visible in the frigid air. His workers were inside, safe and warm. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something in the storm. Suddenly, a loud sound broke through the wind, a low, deep rumble that shook the ground beneath him. It wasn't thunder, and it wasn't the sound of machinery. It was something alive. Jack's heart raced as he scanned the horizon. The blizzard was so thick, he could barely see anything beyond the walls of the shelter. But then, through the snow, he saw it, a massive shape moving toward him. Barely visible through the snow, its figure outlined by the glow of the shelter's lights. For a moment, Jack thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Was it an illusion? A mirage created by the storm? He rubbed his eyes and looked again. But no, the shape was still there, getting closer. His first instinct was to run back inside, to lock the door and let whatever it was pass by. But something inside him, some small spark of curiosity, told him to wait. The shape grew larger, and Jack could now make out details, large, sweeping wings, scales glittering like ice in the dim light. He couldn't believe it. Dragons. Real, live dragons, just like the stories from Earth's ancient myths. But these weren't the fire-breathing beasts from fairy tales. These dragons were struggling, barely able to keep their wings from freezing in the deadly cold. The largest dragon, its dark blue scales shimmering against the snow, staggered forward, its massive body trembling. Jack's eyes widened. The dragon was clearly exhausted, hurt, and freezing. Behind it were other smaller dragons, but still enormous, covered in frost and barely able to move. Jack hesitated, his mind racing. What was going on? Why were dragons here? He had never seen anything like this before. Were they some kind of advanced species, or were they just lost, stranded like the rest of them? And more importantly, why had they come here? The answer came in the form of a desperate cry. Please. Shelter. The voice was weak, shaky, but it was unmistakable. The dragons were speaking to him, their words clear despite the cold, the wind, and the storm. The smallest dragon, a young one barely the size of a small ship, staggered forward, its claws dragging through the snow. It was trembling with cold, barely able to stand. Jack's heart went out to them. He had never seen a creature so big and yet so vulnerable. He didn't know much about dragons, but he could see the desperation in their eyes. They needed help. The large dragon, the one with the shimmering blue scales, looked at Jack with an intelligence that went beyond any animal he had encountered. It spoke again, its voice like a low rumble. Please. We need shelter. The storm. It will kill us. Jack stared at the dragons for a moment, his mind spinning. This was insane. But they were obviously in trouble, serious trouble. He couldn't just leave them out there to die. He had to do something. After a long pause, Jack made a decision. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Follow me. I can get you inside. The dragons, moving slowly and cautiously, followed Jack as he led them toward the shelter. He knew that the other miners wouldn't understand, that they would be afraid, maybe even panic. But right now, it didn't matter. These creatures needed help. As they passed through the large steel doors of the colony, the warmth hit the dragons, and they let out low, relieved groans. Their freezing bodies reacted to the warmth in a way Jack had never seen before. It was as if the heat was bringing them back to life. Once inside, Jack immediately called for the medics to assess the dragons. The team was shocked at first, but they quickly got to work. checking the dragons for injuries and signs of frostbite. One of the smaller dragons had deep frostbite on its wings, and the larger one seemed to be suffering from some internal injury, possibly from the cold or exhaustion. Jack watched, concerned, as the medics worked, but his mind kept wandering back to the strange sight he had witnessed: dragons here, on this frozen world. He had never thought he would see something so magical. The blue-scaled dragon, who appeared to be the leader, turned to Jack as the medics worked. "Thank you," it said softly, its voice heavy with gratitude. Jack nodded, his mind still racing. "What are you? Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The dragon paused, as if considering how to answer. "We are the last of our kind," it said slowly, its eyes sad. "Our home was destroyed by an enemy we cannot defeat. We fled, and now we seek refuge." It hesitated. "We did not expect to find shelter here, but we have no other choice." Jack felt a wave of sympathy for the dragon family. They weren't just animals. They were survivors. They had fought for their lives, just as he had fought to keep the colony going through all these years. They were not so different after all. He gave the dragon a small nod. "You're safe here. We'll do what we can to help." The dragon lowered its head, its large eyes reflecting the faint light of the shelter. "Thank you," it whispered. "You may never know how much this means to us." As the storm raged outside, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The dragons had come seeking shelter, but what was waiting for them beyond the storm? What dangers were they fleeing? And how much of an impact would this chance encounter have on the human colony? As Jack turned back to the medics, the dragons rested, their breathing steadying. And Jack knew one thing for certain: life on this frozen world would never be the same again. The storm raged outside, but inside the human shelter, a strange calm had settled. The dragons, exhausted and battered by the freezing cold, rested in one corner of the shelter, their massive forms curled protectively around their young, their eyes closed in what appeared to be deep, tired sleep. The warmth of the human base was slowly bringing them back to life, but the damage was done. They were weak, and their bodies trembled from the cold they had endured for so long. Jack Carrington stood near the entrance, watching them closely. He had never seen creatures like this before: immense, powerful, yet vulnerable. His mind buzzed with questions. How had they survived so long in the frozen wasteland? Where had they come from? And most importantly, why had they come to this place, to this small colony, in the first place? As Jack pondered, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Lisa, one of the medics. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with concern. "Jack, we need to talk," she said softly. He turned to her. "What's wrong?" "We've checked them over, and there's something strange going on," Lisa said. "They're not just animals. They're intelligent, maybe more than we are. They seem to have some kind of energy manipulation abilities." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, clearly unsure of how to explain. "We've been trying to treat their injuries, but when we used a heat pack on one of the dragons, its wounds started to heal faster. It's almost like they can control their body temperature, or something more." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He had already suspected that these creatures were not ordinary. There was something about them that didn't fit the usual patterns of life on this planet. But he never imagined they could possess abilities like that. "I'll talk to them," Jack said. His voice firm. Lisa nodded. "Just be careful. We don't know what they're capable of." Jack nodded and walked toward the dragons. The large blue-scaled dragon that had spoken to him earlier, the one that seemed to be the leader, looked up as he approached. Its golden eyes glimmered with intelligence, watching him carefully. "Are you feeling better?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The dragon blinked slowly, its wings twitching slightly. "We are recovering," it said, its voice heavy but soft. "But the cold was too much. We would not have survived without your help." Jack nodded, trying to ignore the overwhelming sense of awe he felt. "What happened to you? Why were you out there in the storm?" The dragon's eyes darkened, and it looked away. The younger dragons seemed to tense, their scales bristling, but the leader didn't seem afraid. It took a deep breath and began to speak. "Our people. We are the last of an ancient race. Our world, our home, was destroyed by an enemy we could not fight. They came from beyond the stars, and they wiped out everything. Our cities, our forests, our people. Everything was burned, destroyed. Jack's heart sank. The weight of the dragon's words hung heavy in the air. They had not just fled from the cold. They had fled from destruction. The dragons were survivors of a war, of a massacre. We managed to escape. But we've been hunted ever since, the dragon continued. They do not stop. Wherever we go, they follow. They will not rest until every last one of us is gone. Jack felt a surge of anger. How could anyone or anything do such a thing? He looked at the dragon, his mind racing. Who are they? Why are they after you? The dragon hesitated. They are a race of beings who seek to conquer and destroy all in their path. They see us as a threat to their rule. We have been running for centuries, but we are too few, and our strength is fading. Jack could see the pain in the dragon's eyes. This wasn't just about survival. It was about the loss of a people, of a history. And yet, the dragons had come here, to his small, isolated colony. Why? What do you want from us? Jack asked, the question finally slipping from his lips. The dragon met his gaze, its golden eyes searching. We seek shelter. We do not expect you to fight for us, but we ask for protection. Your people, your technology. It may be the last hope we have left. Jack stood in silence for a long moment, his mind heavy with the weight of their words. He had never imagined a day like this. He had always thought of himself as a simple foreman. His job was to mine, to maintain the colony, to keep things running smoothly. But now, he was caught in the middle of a war that wasn't even his still. One thing was clear, the dragons needed them, and as much as Jack felt the pressure, he knew there was no turning back. Okay, Jack said finally. You have shelter here, but we need to know more. We need to understand your enemies. If we're going to protect you, we need to know what we're up against. The dragon nodded, its large head lowering slightly. We will tell you what we know, but we must move quickly. They are close. Jack felt a chill. Not from the cold, but from the seriousness in the dragon's voice. It wasn't just a matter of hiding. The enemy was coming. The dragon turned its gaze to the rest of its family, its expression softening. The younger dragons were still weak, but they seemed to draw comfort from their leader's presence. They weren't just fighters, they were a family, and they had been through unimaginable hardship. As Jack watched the dragons, he realized something. These creatures were not invincible, not unstoppable. They were like him, like his people. They were trying to survive, trying to protect those they loved. And they had nowhere left to go. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The storm outside had intensified, but there was something else. Something deeper. He turned to the dragon. What's happening? The dragon's eyes widened in alarm. They are here. The enemy. They have found us. Before Jack could respond, the ground shook harder, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the walls of the shelter. The storm outside had nothing on the fear that now gripped his chest. The dragons were no longer just refugees. They were warriors, and they had brought the fight to their doorstep. The ground trembled again, harder this time, as if the planet itself were shaking in fear. Jack Carrington rushed to the window of the shelter, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the heavy snowfall, he could see the faint glow of something in the distance. It was growing stronger by the second. The dragons stirred behind him, their massive forms shifting, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The leader, the blue-scaled dragon, lifted its head high and growled low, a sound that rumbled deep in the air. They've come, the dragon said, its voice tight with urgency. The enemy is here. Jack's stomach twisted with dread. He had known this was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for the feeling of helplessness that washed over him. The storm outside was fierce, but this new threat was far more terrifying. They're in the sky. The dragon continued. Their ships dark, like shadows in the storm. They have weapons that can burn entire cities. And they are coming for us. Jack swallowed hard. The first wave of enemy ships had already arrived, their silhouettes visible against the swirling white of the blizzard. They were enormous, towering, sleek black ships that moved through the sky with unnatural speed. Jack couldn't even begin to imagine how advanced their technology was. "Do we have any chance?" Jack asked, his voice tight. The dragon did not answer immediately. Instead, it looked at the other dragons. They were weak, their bodies still recovering from the cold. And Jack knew they were far from being ready for a fight. But the fear in their eyes said that all this was no longer about survival. This was a war. "You must help us," the blue-scaled dragon finally said. "You have resources, technology. Your people have weapons. Together, we might stand a chance." Jack felt a spark of determination deep inside him. He didn't know if they could win, but he knew they had to try. For the dragons. For their own survival. He turned to the shelter's communications panel, his mind working quickly. "Lisa." He called into the comms. "Get the miners ready. We need to fight back. I don't know how, but we can't just wait for them to attack." The voice of Lisa, the medic, crackled through the speakers. "Jack, we've seen the ships. They're massive. Do you really think we can do anything against them?" "We have to try," Jack replied firmly. "Get everyone together. Weapons, whatever we can use, we'll be ready," Lisa said. There was no hesitation in her voice. She had always been the practical one, the one who kept calm when everything seemed to be falling apart. Jack turned to the dragons. "What can you do?" "We need a plan." The blue-scaled dragon's eyes burned with fierce resolve. "We can create a barrier, a shield to protect the shelter. It will not last long, but it will give you time to prepare. Our power is fading, but we have enough for one last stand." Jack nodded, his mind racing. The enemy's ships were already descending, their dark shapes becoming clearer against the storm. He could feel the tension rising in the shelter. Every miner, every worker knew that this was no ordinary storm. It was a fight for their lives. Minutes later, the first enemy ship landed in the snow, its engines hissing as they powered down. The ground trembled under its weight, sending a shiver through Jack's body. He could feel the power of it, the sheer scale of the destruction it could bring. And it was just the beginning. "Stay inside," Jack ordered, his voice steady. "The dragons are going to create a shield, but we have to keep moving quickly. Get everything ready." The miners nodded and began moving, gathering whatever weapons they could find: blasters, mining tools, anything that could be used to fight. Jack's heart was heavy as he watched them. They weren't soldiers, just regular people who had been forced to survive in this cold, hostile place. But today, they would have to become fighters. The dragons, their wings slightly extended, stood in a circle at the center of the shelter, their bodies glowing faintly. The leader of the dragons, the blue-scaled one, closed its eyes and let out a deep, rumbling growl. Slowly, the air around them began to shimmer, a faint golden light flickering in the edges of the room. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The dragons weren't just creatures of strength, they were beings of power, able to manipulate the very elements. He had seen it before, when the dragons had healed themselves with the heat of their bodies. But this was something different. This was energy raw, unfiltered, and powerful. The air around them grew thick, a barrier of energy forming between the shelter and the outside world. Jack could feel the pressure in his chest as the shield began to take shape. It was magnificent and terrifying. "Get to the weapon storage," Jack shouted to the miners. "We need everything we can use." As the workers scrambled to gather what they could, Jack stood near the shield, watching as the enemy ships began to unload. Figures in dark suits began to step out, moving quickly through the snow. They were tall, alien, their faces obscured by helmets. They had come to destroy, and they would stop at nothing to do so. The blue-scaled dragon's eyes opened. "The shield will hold them back for a short time," it said, "but we will not be able to keep it up for long. You must make the most of this moment." Jack nodded. "We'll hold them off as best as we can." Inside the shelter, the atmosphere was tense. The workers were readying their weapons, checking systems, and preparing for the worst. Jack felt the weight of it all. He had never been in a war. He had never fought for survival like this before. But as the first enemy soldiers advanced, he knew there was no turning back. The shield outside flickered and pulsed with energy, holding the enemy at bay. For now, the dragons had bought them time. Time to fight back. Time to show the invaders that they would not give up without a fight. As the first blast of energy from the enemy weapons collided with the barrier, Jack's heart raced. The dragons growled low, their power pushing back against the invaders' onslaught. The battle had begun, and Jack knew that this was just the start. The skies above were filled with fire. The earth below was shaking. But one thing was certain: they would not go down without a fight. The wind howled outside, louder now, as if the storm itself were an enemy. Inside the shelter, the air was tense with fear and determination. Jack Carrington stood near the central control console, watching the large, shimmering energy barrier that the dragons had created. It pulsed with a golden light, holding back the alien invaders, but Jack knew it wouldn't last long. The first blast from the alien weapons had shaken the shield, sending a ripple of energy through the air. The dragons, their wings flickering with energy, held the barrier together. But it was clear they were straining. Their power was fading, and the enemy wasn't going to stop. The blue-scaled dragon, their leader, stood at the center of the shield, its eyes focused and determined. Jack could see the effort it took to maintain the shield. It wasn't just physical. It was as though the dragon was channeling all its strength, its life force, into the energy that held the enemy back. Sweat glistened on its scales, and its breathing was labored, but it didn't falter. "How long can you hold this?" Jack asked, his voice tight with urgency. "For as long as we can," the dragon replied, its voice low and strained. "But we need to end this soon. We cannot keep them away forever." Jack knew that the dragons were doing everything they could, but time was running out. The first enemy ships had already landed, and their soldiers were advancing toward the shelter, their dark suits blending with the storm. They weren't just here to conquer. They were here to wipe out every last one of the dragons, to finish what they had started long ago. The miners and workers inside the shelter were preparing for the worst. They had gathered every weapon available: blasters, mining equipment, anything that could be used to fight. Jack had never expected to lead a battle like this. He was just a foreman, someone who dealt with equipment, schedules, and workers. But now, he was the leader of a desperate group of survivors, and his people were looking to him for guidance. "Jack," Lisa called out, her voice coming through the comms. "We've got the weapons set up. The defensive systems are in place, but the enemy is moving too fast. We need to plan something more than just holding them off." Jack clenched his fists. Lisa was right. Just defending wouldn't be enough. They needed to fight back, to strike before it was too late. But how? The enemy had advanced technology, weapons that could obliterate anything in their path, and the dragons were nearly drained of their strength. "We don't have much time," Jack said, speaking out loud more to himself than anyone else. "But we have one advantage they haven't fully attacked yet. If we can take out their leaders, the rest of their forces might fall apart." Lisa's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Do you think we can get close enough to them? Their troops are well organized, and the ships are heavily protected." Jack thought for a moment. "We can't get close from the ground. But if we can get to their ships, if we can use their own technology against them, we might have a chance." Lisa was silent for a moment. "Okay, I'll prepare the transport pods. We'll need everyone who's ready to fight. We're in this together." Jack looked over at the dragons. They were standing in the center of the shelter, their wings flickering with energy, their eyes tired but filled with resolve. The leader, the blue-scaled dragon, locked eyes with Jack. "You have a plan?" it asked, its voice low and steady. "We're going to strike before they have a chance to fully organize," Jack said. "We're going to take out their ships. If we can disrupt their command structure, we might be able to turn the tide." The blue-scaled dragon nodded slowly. "We will help, but we cannot fight alone. Your people must be strong. We can give you the power, but you must carry out the plan." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the plan felt heavy, but he knew they had no other choice. He turned to the rest of the miners and workers. "We're going to do this together. The dragons will give us the power we need, but we have to act fast. We can't afford to wait any longer." The miners nodded, their faces grim but determined. They weren't soldiers, but they had fought to survive in this harsh, unforgiving environment for years. They knew how to keep going when things seemed impossible. "We're ready," Lisa said, stepping forward with a weapon in hand. "Let's do this." Jack turned back to the dragons. "We'll need cover fire. The enemy has soldiers, but if we can get close enough to their ships, we can use their own systems against them." The blue-scaled dragon spread its wings, and the other dragons followed suit. "We will create a path, but be swift. The longer we wait, the more dangerous they will become." Without another word, the dragons unleashed a burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the storm. The ground shook as the energy shield flickered, but it held firm. The invaders would have to deal with the dragons first before they could even reach the shelter. The transport pods were prepped, and Jack led the group of miners and workers outside, their weapons ready. The wind whipped at their faces, the snow blinding, but Jack focused on the task at hand. The path had been cleared. Now it was up to them to take the fight to the enemy. They moved quickly, staying low to the ground to avoid being seen. The dragons flew overhead, their massive forms cutting through the storm, their energy blasts lighting up the sky like fireworks. The enemy soldiers responded, firing their weapons at the dragons, but the creatures were fast, their movements graceful and powerful despite their fatigue. Jack's heart raced as they approached the enemy ships. They were enormous, dark shapes against the storm, their sleek designs intimidating. The ships were surrounded by a thick defensive perimeter, but the dragons had created a gap in their defenses. "Stay close," Jack shouted as they reached the first ship. The group split into teams, setting up explosives near the base of the ship's engines. The miners worked quickly, placing the charges while Jack and the others kept watch for enemy soldiers. The dragons provided cover, their energy blasts keeping the invaders at bay. As the charges were set, Jack's mind raced. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. "Set the timer for 5 minutes, Jack said, his voice sharp. "We need to be out of here before they retaliate." The timer was set, and Jack gave the signal. "Let's move." They ran for cover, ducking behind rocks and structures as the explosions rang out. The enemy ships rocked violently, their engines rupturing under the blast. The sky lit up with fire, and the invaders screamed in fury. But the battle wasn't over. The enemy was relentless, and Jack knew they would keep coming. But for the first time since the attack began, Jack felt a flicker of hope. The dragons had given them a chance to fight back, and now it was up to them to make it count. The explosions still echoed in the air as the enemy ships burned in the distance. Jack Carrington stood at the edge of the wreckage, his heart racing, his breath coming in short bursts. The ground was still trembling beneath him, but there was no time to rest. The battle wasn't over. The dragons had given everything they had to help the humans escape, to create a path for them to strike at the enemy. But Jack knew that even with their power, the fight was far from won. The invaders were regrouping, and they would come back with even more force. "We've done it," Lisa said, her voice shaky but determined. "The ships are down, but we need to move quickly." "They're going to retaliate," Jack nodded. "We need to get back to the shelter, prepare for the next wave." The miners and workers had done their part, planting explosives around the enemy's ships, but now they needed to prepare for the final assault. The enemy would not give up easily. Suddenly, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the air. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see the blue-scaled dragon approaching. The creature was limping, its massive wings drooping, its scales dulled from exhaustion. It had given everything it had to protect them, but Jack could see that it was now close to the edge. "You did well," Jack said, his voice full of respect and gratitude. "But we need you to hold the line a little longer. We've got to keep fighting." The dragon's golden eyes flickered with exhaustion, but there was still a fire in them. "We cannot hold much longer," it said softly. "We are not what we once were. Our power is fading." Jack's heart sank. He had known that the dragons were weakening, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. They had already given so much too much. "What are you saying?" Jack asked, his voice tight with concern. The dragon lowered its head, its voice barely a whisper. "I am saying that we cannot protect you forever. Our time is running out." Jack felt a coldness settle in his chest. He knew that the dragon was right. The invaders were regrouping, and without the dragon's help, they would be sitting ducks. But there was no time to dwell on that now. "We need a plan," Jack said, his voice sharp. "We'll fight until the end. The enemy won't stop, and neither will we." The dragon's eyes softened. "We will fight with you," it said, "but we will not last. You must be ready." Jack clenched his fists. The weight of their survival was on him now. He turned to the others, his mind racing. "Get to the weapons. We need every person we have. Prepare for the final stand," as the miners and workers rushed to their stations. Jack glanced back at the dragon. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." The dragon nodded. "It is our honor to help." But even as the dragon spoke, its wings flickered weakly. Jack could see the strain it was under. The energy shield that had protected them for so long was beginning to crack, and the dragon's power was fading with every passing moment. Minutes passed, and the sound of distant enemy ships grew louder. The time for hiding was over. Jack and the dragons had made their stand, and now they would face the final battle. The enemy soldiers were approaching. Their dark figures moved in the snow like shadows, their weapons raised, ready to strike. The dragons flew above them, sending blasts of energy to slow their advance. But even their powerful attacks couldn't stop the oncoming tide. "We can't hold them off forever," Lisa shouted from behind Jack. "I know," Jack replied. "But we fight now. We fight for our lives, and we fight for the dragons." The first wave of enemy soldiers reached the shelter's perimeter. Jack's heart pounded as he took his place at the front, his weapon raised, ready to fire. The miners and workers, though not soldiers, stood with him, their faces grim but determined. They were ready. They had to be. The dragons swooped down, their wings sending gusts of wind through the snow. They unleashed blast after blast of energy, lighting up the stormy sky. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was relentless. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. The shield that had been protecting the shelter shattered, sending a shock wave through the air. Jack's stomach dropped. The dragons had used up their last reserves of power. The shield was gone, and the enemy was pouring in. "Get inside," Jack shouted, pushing the miners and workers back toward the shelter. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The dragons fought fiercely, but Jack could see that they were weakening with every passing moment. The blue-scaled dragon, their leader, was the last to stay in the air, its wings faltering, its energy drained. It let out one final roar, a cry that echoed through the storm. Before it collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, Jack ran to the dragon's side, his heart breaking as he knelt beside it. "No," he shouted, his voice filled with pain and frustration. The dragon looked up at him with tired eyes. "You have fought bravely," it whispered. "It is time for us to rest." Jack's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't know what to say. The dragons had given everything for them, everything, and now they were paying the price. The dragon's eyes slowly closed, its breathing shallow. "We will not forget you," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. The final wave of enemy soldiers reached them, and Jack knew there was no time left. The battle was lost for the dragons, but the humans were still alive, and they would fight until the end. As the enemy soldiers advanced, Jack gave one last order. "For the dragons, for the survivors," he shouted. The miners and workers, their weapons raised high, charged forward to meet the enemy. It was a desperate fight, but they would not go down without a struggle. And somewhere, in the storm, the last of the dragons flew one final flight, their wings cutting through the icy sky, their spirits rising, leaving behind a legacy that would never be forgotten.